Hello and welcome to 81 All Out. This is your host, Siddhartha Vaidyanathan, and I would like to thank you for taking the time out to listen to this podcast. We are a crowd-funded endeavor, and you can support us at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/81 All Out to keep the show going.
In the air, Srishan takes it. India win. He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India are home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And today I'm delighted to be joined by two of the finest cricket writers to talk about one of the finest cricket books. First, let me tell you about the book that we're going to discuss. It's titled War Minus the Shooting by the late acclaimed writer Mike Marquisee. And it came out 25 years ago on the back of the 1996 World Cup that was held in the subcontinent. We are now, have 25 years after that tournament, and many of us who grew up watching that tournament are feeling very old these days. Anyway, War Minus the Shooting is much more than a cricket book. At the heart of the book is a journey through India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka during the World Cup. But it comes to cricket through so many prisms of politics, economics, culture, and it does such a good job of breaking down the divisions that exist between the game, whether it's in terms of class or caste or regional boundaries, religious tempers that play during the games of cricket, etc. So Marquisee was an American who moved to Britain as an adult, and he brings forth such original insight in the book that you almost wish that more Americans start watching the game and start writing about it. So to talk about it, I have two of my favorite people here, and I should actually say three because Mahesh will feel very left out. So first, welcome Mahesh. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks, Sidvi.
Also, a warm welcome to veteran sports writer and journalist Sharda Ugra, who's been on the show before. Hi, Sharda. Welcome again. And I must mention that Sharda met Mike during that World Cup that we're talking about. And Mike has also fondly referred to her as one of the young stars of Indian sports writing. So Sharda, how does it feel to be so young and to be a star?
Hi, Sid. No, I know Mike slightly earlier than that as well, but that was like, I lived off that introduction for like years. And right now I'm in old age, so I have quietly crashed into the sands of anonymity. Yeah. But great to be here.
Yeah, and also a very warm welcome to Fidel Fernando, Sri Lanka correspondent for ESPN Cricinfo, who has also, of course, been here before, and who I assume will never, ever turn down a chance to talk about the 1996 World Cup. Am I right, Fidel?
Yeah, pretty much. There's no conversation that is more fondly had by any kind of like Sri Lankan cricket fan than anything about 96. However obliquely, however we can like shoehorn 96 World Cup into any polite conversation, we will do it. So to be asked to do something on the 96 World Cup, obviously I'm going to jump at the chance, especially with Sharda and yourself and Mahesh.
Okay, so wonderful. So yes, Fidel also wrote a lovely look back on the 96 World Cup around 2015. And I'll link that. Everyone should read that as well, where in that piece also he quotes Mike Marquisee and the book. So there's a lot going on there. So, okay, so Sharda, you start off by telling us a bit about Mike and when you met him, and also generally your thoughts about him and the influence that he had and his writing had on you.
I think, Sid, I met Mike, I can't remember whether it was 94 or 95, because he had written this novel which is another book, but not this one, called Slow Turn, which had the greatest opening line in any novel that you can have. It said, in Madras, the empire was murdered and that made us uneasy. That is the first line in the book. It tells like the whole story. It's like a piece of fiction. It's the only fiction that he wrote. And I remember thinking, who is this person who's written this, you know? And he had come to cover a match in Bombay. Now, whether that was in 95, whether that was in 95 or in 96, memory is a bit fuzzy at the time. But that's when I met him, and he was so astonished that that book had even got to India. You know, and I met him from there. He chatted. He was a very gregarious person. He was an incredibly brilliant, almost mind. And because I knew that he had then written Anyone But England, that book. If I can get the year of the book correct, then I'll be able to place the time I met him. So he was known for Anyone But England. And Anyone But England echoed to all of us. I think in the subcontinent who read it, it's a very dense sort of piece of English cricket history. But it told us exactly what we thought. We said, yes, this sort of Englishness of cricket is sort of strangling all of us to death here in the subcontinent. And responding to that book, he enjoyed the sort of what Indian cricket was, the absolutely the oppositeness of Indian cricket. And I think the way he covered sport was, I would have been about 25 or 26 years old at the time. And he covered sport in a way that we had not seen it covered before. You know, the whole thing of enjoying sport. And at one point he said, we can all be fans, but that doesn't mean when we are watching something, we take a vacation from critical thinking, which is good. And to sort of play sport and society in a context, almost in a way that CLR James had done. So he was like we looked at him like he was a successor to CLR James in that sense, but someone whom we could meet and know and chat with and get to know. And he was just he was a terrific raconteur, great teller of stories, loved gossiping. Loved chatting to all kinds of people, So I remember him at the Wankhede Stadium press box, and I remember our first meeting, and it was just, and I knew him he became quite a close friend of mine till his death, unfortunately, due to cancer a few years.
Yeah, wonderful. You bring up Anyone But England, which is, of course, a book that Mike Marquis wrote before he wrote this War Minus the Shooting. And the one line that stands out, they recently brought out a few years ago, brought out a new edition for Anyone But England, which and Rahul Bhattacharya wrote the introduction to it. And I must mention that line which he says, which I quote, for some English cricket writers whose souls it incised, marinated in the chili of their own words and slow roasted in a tandoor, it's a source of great irritation.
Only I could have done that. Yeah, I think his most memorable line in Madras, the umpire was murdered, and that made us uneasy. And the umpire had been stabbed in his heart with a stump. You can go on in your discussion.
I actually read that book myself. I picked it up in second-hand bookstores in Bangalore, and I didn't even know who this person was, who this writer was, and I picked it up and I remember reading it, and it was quite a beautiful read.
Yeah, same here. He said, so Mike said, everything that I just found out on my first trip in India, I put it all in that novel,
Okay.
Yeah.
So Fidel, tell us a bit about coming to this book, when you first read it and what you thought about it, and anything that comes to mind about this book.
So I'm going to embarrass myself massively here. Despite this being a book on 96, it was so hard to get a copy, and I think for that piece that I wrote that he mentioned earlier, I kind of skim read the Sri Lanka relevant bits, but it wasn't actually until this year that I picked it up, properly read it cover to cover. So and I'm kind of kicking myself that I hadn't, because it's the kind of book that I wish I'd read very, very early on in my kind of cricket writing career. I was just like raving about the book to a WhatsApp group, and Aman Naqvi, who also writes for Cricinfo and other places, was in that chat, and he was saying how it kind of opened his mind to the kind of writing that was possible through cricket, and I fully agreed with him. For me, Rahul Bhattacharya's Pundits from Pakistan, I read that early enough, and that kind of opened my eyes to, what was possible to do in cricket writing. But I wish I'd read this, 7-8 years back as well, because of just the scathing, almost like searing, insightful social commentary, the kind of like the Marxist kind of like thought that underpins almost everything in the book, the kind of fearlessness with which he writes, and it's just a book that kind of brings together so much of what I enjoy about cricket writing, writing about the place, bringing like a world together, and then also this habit of just taking every single possible pot shot at like the English cricket establishment, which I just found the greatest source of like fun and joy through the whole book. There are so many. He takes detours just to lob another grenade over the wall. He just and I thought that was hilarious. And So I mean, it's a book that I massively enjoy and like will rave about to anybody.
Yeah, the book takes such a dig at England that even while planning his trip for during the World Cup, he makes sure he will not watch a single England match. He will avoid England at all costs. So.
And this Sydney really loved cricket. He loved watching cricket. He loved Test cricket. He liked the sort of, Mike used to love the kind of the spontaneity of being a cricket fan. That it wasn't like an American sport where you're getting cheered on and shouts out defense, offense, and you're shaking or whatever. He liked the complete spontaneity of cricket supportership in England, and he loved it. But the establishment he just did not suffer them at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and he made no bones about it as well. But one interesting point, two interesting points. One is Fidel. It was nice to listen to Fidel talk about the Marxist ideology underpinning Mike Marques's writings. I mean, there is a certain nice ring to Fidel talking about it. And two, also about the finding the book and it is difficult for many people to find the book. I don't know why it was difficult for me to find the book back then. I read it, in early 2000s when I joined Cricinfo 2003. They had a set of books in their bookshelf, and this was one of the books. So I picked it up and read it, which was also like nearly 7 years after the book was published. But of course, these days it's out of print, and you have to look for used copies. I got a used copy of Amazon, and I would heartily recommend everyone listening to get a used copy. But Mahesh, if you can come in, you had a particularly interesting time finding this book recently, right?
Yeah, recently as well as initially. The first time I read was sometime in 2014, almost entirely by accident, because I'd been looking for this book for many years, and I never found it anywhere, not in Marine Sports, not in Roger Page bookstore, anywhere, like whichever bookshop is very popular in whatever country I went to. I tried, I couldn't find it. And almost by accident, I was at a colleague's place in Singapore one day, and I was just, waiting for him to, get something before going to office. And I was looking at his bookshelf, and I saw this. I'm like, dude, why haven't you told me about this? I've been looking for this for years, and it's there in a shelf of 50 books. It's one of the books. What are the odds? I picked it up and I started reading, and I'm very glad that I read it pretty late in my life. Like what Fidel mentioned, there's such searing politics in this book. I don't think I would have appreciated any of it had I read it like when I was not a fully formed adult. That was when I first read it, and for some weird reason I kept it back in Chennai. So for this occasion, when Sidvi suggested this idea, I was desperate to read it again because I'm pretty sure that I'll get some more out of it if I read it at this stage of my life. And I Googled it. I found a way to buy it from Amazon, a used book. Nothing was working. And Google has this search option where it gives you the availability in a nearby library. And usually the option for cricket books is always the nearest library for me in Singapore is Victoria or New South Wales or whatever. Like taking the distance, the nearest library is in Australia, right? For some strange reason, I found National Institute of Education in Singapore. I'm like, what are the odds? I'm sure it is a mistake. I was 100% sure it is a mistake. And I realized it's not. So I called up the library. They said, yes, it is available. But that library is only accessible to teachers who are under the Ministry of Education in Singapore. Or by some strange coincidence, if you happen to be a student of NTU, I think it's National Technology University or whatever. So I went to LinkedIn, found people who are like, who've been an alumnus or who are a student or who are doing a PhD or whatever. and found one ex-colleague of mine who's from PRC. And he had like passed out 6 years back. And through him, I found a PhD student from his batch who's still there. And through him, I got the book, passed it on to him, and just about got it in the nick of time. I got it passed on to me yesterday. And that's probably the only library in the whole of Asia which has a book. And I was looking at the borrowing history of it. I think this book has been there for a long, long time. And it's only ever been borrowed once. So it's still a very fairly fresh copy, to be honest.
So for probably 25 years, it's been lying in that library and has been borrowed just once.
Yeah.
And who are you going to nick it?
I do have a copy in Chennai, so I don't have the motivation to nick it, to be honest. And of all places in the world, Singapore is the last place I would think of nicking anything.
Yeah. So yeah, Sharda, to your point about the crowds, I mean, he does make the point through the book about how, the American sports have almost, they're being spoon-fed into what they should do at a game. And I think he uses the word atomized, and how each individual there is atomized, and how, he came to cricket, but also he got very irritated with things in the 1996 World Cup, which of course these days we take for granted. But he writes pretty, strongly about PTV, Pakistan TV, going to ads in the middle of the over, and then seeing corporate logos at the screen and things. But I'm saying, I mean, now we all know that's pretty much part of cricket, all this. But back then, he saw what was coming.
Yeah. In the sense also that I think what happened is that 96, in my mind, sort of marked the time where almost the last big stand of the Asian bloc, what we should call the Asian bloc in cricket, number one, and number two, of the change in Indian cricket crowds, which I think he noted in his own way when he is writing in the book about the Delhi, but when he has changed about Delhi. Delhi has always been like that. Delhi, the Delhi chapter has such a brilliant title. It's called The Nest of VIP Vipers, but it's VIP in capital letters, because everything in Delhi is about VIP. And I would wonder what he would make. He was just in his last years when the IPL began, and I wonder what he would make of what it's become at this point. And I think he would have seen a almost. He had a certain clarity about how he looked at even particularly a cricket event, because he was in many ways an outsider. But who had done his work, and he had done the research that he needed to be that insider, to write about them in that way. Maybe, I don't think, I'm sorry, I don't think I should have said to be an insider. I don't think an insider could have written particularly anyone, but and this book could have written it in that way. And I think he would have seen the Americanization of cricket happening a little earlier than we did after the 2020 began, and it sort of fell into place, and the franchise sport came into being.
The one kind of bit that really hit home to me was him talking about how in this World Cup there were kind of like the music being played in between the overs and all this kind of thing, and how that was taking away from the creativity that the crowd itself provides, especially in South Asia. And now, I mean, we're now in an era where we barely ever see those like great placards and slogans that people used to bring to crowds, and he used to talk about. And he wrote in the book about how slogan writing was kind of like almost as an art form, and how kind of cool it was. And we barely see, I mean, definitely in Sri Lankan crowds, we barely see it anymore. And I was just struck by that. And then I think I was at an IPL game a couple of years ago. I think Sharda, you were there as well at the Chinnaswamy. I was just struck by how stage managed the entire crowd experience was. Yeah. You just walk in the door, and from the moment you step out into the stands, the stadium announcers, like a drill sergeant, telling you exactly what to do. Like, this is when you do the RCB chant. This is when you do the Kohli chant. This is this is when you start the Mexican wave. It's all like you're kind of like under it's like a North Korean military show almost. Like you're just under the dictates of this like person with the mic, and there is no creativity. There's nothing that you as a crowd can yourself come up with and Marcus writes about it. Marcus writes about how it used to be like this, where the crowd itself came up with these chants, came up with things that they would do, interact with the game. But now the IPL is kind of like an extreme version where nothing is not like corporatized and like brought under the sphere of this kind of authoritarian influence. And that I found was like incredibly prescient, because I would never have seen that coming, but he did.
Yeah, which is what I wanted to ask Sharda also. Sharda, as somebody who covered that tournament, and did it seem like a moment where things were so drastically different, or did you have to wait a few more years before you realized that change? Because Marcus sees it for him, it seems to be quite a big shift.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed it. I didn't go to too many games because I was quite a junior reporter. I was working for the Hindu at the time. So I actually went to Sri Lanka for the Sri Lanka-Zimbabwe match when nobody else wanted to go to Sri Lanka because the bomb blast had taken place. The World Trade Center, wasn't it the World Trade Center? Yeah, Central Bank. Sorry, that one. So I went to a couple of the games in Sri Lanka. I went to I watched the India-Australia match. I wasn't reporting it. Then I went to Pune. And at the India-Australia match, for the first time that I'd been to an international match, the crowd response felt much more, so almost feral, That's what it felt like, as compared to what it used to be previously, which was just like one hangama and one scene and a tamasha and whatever. And then that happened when India-Pakistan played that World Cup in Bangalore, and Javed Mirdad was booed. And to my mind, that was the time where I wrote a short report about it. I don't know how the Hindu published it at that time, but they did, about the crowd having changed, and becoming this almost. It was before the time that they stopped clapping for the opposition, but something had. I almost thought that something had shifted, and I remember noting it down in an article that this had happened. That it was not what it used to be. Whatever, and we saw that in Calcutta, they set the stands on fire and all the rest of that, Maybe it was just Mumbai, because Mumbai had become that kind of a city. It had just moved from being Bombay to Mumbai. So it had sort of changed. It had become jingoistic in that sense. Mumbai had always had a very sophisticated cricket watching audience by and large, but it had sort of switched into this kind of jingoism. I remember noticing it quite palpably at the time.
Yeah, talking about the political word and politics, though. I mean, I was pretty young then, but all the cricket I read, it didn't have very much of looking at the sport through the political or economic prism, because it was mostly magazine articles or newspaper articles where people were writing about the game. But then in this book, you read it, and almost every single passage, Mike will take a detour into talking about, something that is connected to the sport, but not necessarily of the sport itself. Like he will write about going to Faisalabad, the cricket stadium there, and then he will take this little detour of the only stadium named after a poet. Named after a poet. And then he will write about the Sialkot sports good industry. And then he will bring in the whole economics of child labor, and everything will have like a mini thesis going on there.
And the thing about him, I must tell you, Sid, that he had like almost an encyclopedic, what is the opposite of, he had like an encyclopedic range to absorb knowledge. So when he absorbed it, means he just dived into it fully. So by the time, this would have been about maybe the 96, but he took a great interest in the Qawwali as an art form and as a music and whatever. He got fully stuck into it. When Mike Marcus got stuck into everything, he could do a PhD. Like I was saying, he could do a PhD on the subject. And this wasn't just, it was, one of those people whose brain is like a sponge. He was like that. So he was able to see things and show you patterns that even as someone sitting in the same place and at the same time and sitting next to him would not be able to see. And that was just beyond the boundary almost, I'm sure if he sat at Kotla, he would have looked and thought of old Delhi, and he would have thought of Shah Jahan, and he would have thought of God knows what. he had that kind of a mind and that kind of a range of grasping this whole thing of, of seeing the big picture, of seeing many things in the big picture. He was just incredible that way.
Yeah, the encyclopedic range is amazing. I mean, he's able to connect. I mean, he's able to sit in a taxi in Pakistan. He's listening to Alisha Chennai's Made in India. And then he makes this, within one sentence, he will make this completely mind-blowing connection and how pop culture between different cultures and different societies. And then he will take you through 1,000 years of history. And then he will come back. And then he'll say, oh, and the match happened.
Yeah, that's him. That is just Mike. That was him. That was his. And the other thing that sort of we became friends about is that he suddenly discovered that I was a Bruce Springsteen fan. And he actually came from America and he had like this thing, and he was shocked he was surprised. And we talked Bruce Springsteen thing, which of course in my mind was saying 5 sentences about a song, and Mike will tell you these, this huge long this thing he'll give you about the American Rust Belt and New Jersey, the New Jersey Strip, and industrial relations, and it wasn't that he was talking down to you or giving you a lecture. It was like sharing it, like saying, listen, this is the most amazing thing about this, and he would tell this to you, And at the same time, he would listen as well. He was a very good listener. Clayton and I had dinner with him once, and he just sat there and listened to Clayton's stories about Mumbai cricket. Clayton being Clayton Murzello for the
Yeah, Clayton Murzello, who he's also mentioned in the introduction of the book as somebody who does the best Azhar impersonations.
Yeah. That's true. We had dinner in Pune, and that's the Azhar impersonation that he did. Outstanding it was. Yeah.
Yeah, so Fidel, as somebody who writes on cricket on a daily basis, I mean, you reading the book, I mean, did you have a similarly mind-blowing sort of feeling about it? How this writer is able to basically start off with, say, a cover drive, and then go into like some 20 different things, and then come back to it within a paragraph to the next cover drive.
Yeah, I mean, it is stunning. I thought it was just like phenomenally well researched. I think the thing that struck me most about the book was not.
I'm interrupting Fidel. It was not research. Mike just knows.
Mike just knew it. Okay.
He just knew. There was no research. He just knew.
So I mean, that's even more incredible in a way. But like, I think the thing that struck me even more than that was to have someone who, was so far out of the kind of subcontinent or like the South Asian milieu, writing so perceptively about like South Asia. I'm going to get in a little bit of trouble for saying that, but screw it. This is what I think. This is the kind of book that like if you're a non-South Asian cricket writer and you're going to write about South Asia, you should have to read this book first, just to know, like, obviously I'm talking about like, largely Westerners, because just to show what it's possible to do. And like, this is someone who writes, not all of us will be as good as Mike Marquisee. Like this is very, very, very high, kind of highbrow and like gold standard cricket writing, right? Like not all of us can be that good, but it is something like I think a lot of us could aspire to, because he approaches the culture and he doesn't. So as someone who kind of has written about travel as well, he kind of picks out things in South Asia, never exoticizes, but obviously enjoys them. And then also, when there are genuine ills, he goes into why these are genuine ills. He doesn't shy away from being like scathingly critical of certain things, and not just being scathingly critical, but going into how these kind of bad things came about, and putting kind of the web together, putting the story together of how this particular brand of nationalism came about, or how this kind of inefficiency came about. He would go into the backstory and bring you into the whole world, and he wrote like so sympathetically, and everything was a factor of kind of external factors rather than kind of never relies on these kind of tropes that we hear from Western writers often when they write about the global South, developing world, where people in the global South are kind of irredeemably flawed in some ways. Like no one is irredeemably flawed in Mike Marquesee's book. They're all a product of circumstances, and he goes into the circumstances. I thought that was what was so brilliant about the book. is that there is no, there's very little like simplification. There's very little glossing over things. He just brings like this kind of intellectual rigor to everything he says. The one aspect I will say, and maybe we'll get into it later, is that his things about Sri Lanka didn't like fully hit home to me. That chapter about being kind of last gentleman that was probably for me his weakest chapter of the book. But we can talk about that later, maybe.
You mean the book about the famous college match between Nalanda and Ananda, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think there. So, I mean, obviously he endears himself to me as a reader very early on the book because he pins his kind of flag to the mast and says, "I'm going for Sri Lanka in this World Cup." So immediately I like him, right? But then his one kind of tour to Colombo. He goes and watches an Ananda-Nalanda match, I think. Oh, sorry, it's not an Ananda, it's a Nalanda match. And Mahela Jayawardene is playing, and it's like a star for Nalanda time, so Mahela gets a mention.
I think he gets a mention as Maheli.
Yeah, Maheli, that's right, yeah, that's right. My one frustration with that chapter is that he's kind of seeing this kind of very elite, very kind of like private school version of Sri Lankan cricket, which for me is kind of like what is maddening, right? Like, but I'm talking 25 years later. And the one thing I will say is that for him in the 90s, when cricket wasn't a democratized sport in Sri Lanka, you know, in the rural provinces, it wasn't that popular. It was popular to an extent, but until the 96 World Cup was won, it didn't kind of take over the country. So back in pre-96 World Cup win, perhaps there weren't so many people kind of clamoring outside the gates of this kind of elite institution wanting to get in, and so you probably didn't see the limitations and the kind of the ways in which these school structures, the way kind of this brand of like the Sri Lankan cricket gentleman is actually a negative influence on Sri Lankan cricket. He probably wasn't able to see that because it wasn't kind of thrown up in such stark kind of relief as it is now, where you've got people wanting to play the sport, but people kind of holding it in a closed fist, which is very much the case in Sri Lanka right now. So that I will kind of give him a little bit of credit, but I still think that maybe there could have been like a little bit more scathing critique of Sri Lankan cricket, but I'm being this is like nitpicking to an extreme level. Like
he loved Sri Lankan cricket too much, Fidel. You can't.
Yeah, I think yeah, which is not a bad, which, you know, I can't believe I'm complaining about that, but like, there we are.
Yeah, and about I want to just bring up that point about Fidel writing about cricket in South Asia and how people who write about it should read this book. And it's very apparent how he made a genuine attempt to immerse himself. I mean, he didn't go and always stay in the 5-star hotels. He actually went and stayed in some pretty, places that were not.
I mean, he, like you say, he was a full Marxist. You know, there was no denying that in any way. And I think a lot of his empathy came from almost his political background. You know, his empathy with everybody and his sort of ease of relating and talking to people came with that level of, I don't care where I'm from. I don't care about this thing that is called status. Because in any case, he was an American talking about cricket. So anyway, people looked at him strangely, say, for example, in India or whatever. So he was fine with all, and it reflects in his writing as well, because he at that time, and this I'm going to get into huge trouble now, at that time, the cricket writing that used to come from England or Australia about India, not Australia because Mike Coward wrote a super book, but the cricket writing that used to come about India from England was this Orientalist kind of exotic, about Abdul Qadir coming out on some bazaar in the East, and all that kind of exoticization kind of a thing, which we thought at the time when we read whatever Mike wrote, is that Mike got India and Pakistan and not Sri Lanka, not as much as he should have, as like Fidel is saying, but he got the milieu and he got the culture of the cricket that was there. Whereas the other writers who came in, they would just stay in a 5-star hotel, hang out with the team, hang out with their kind, go to CCI once in a while. Raj Singh Dungarpur, God bless them, would buy them dinner. And that was their interaction and their engagement with India. Whereas Mike's was much more, it's reflected very well in the book. And that's why it was so well received here. I mean, in the sense that it was, you couldn't complain about it, even though he was, his account of Yehi Hai Right Choice Baby, and that, I think the guy called Deepak Jolly is just too brilliant.
Deepak Jolly. That is one of the great passages.
Yeah. And we all knew Deepak Jolly also, so we didn't mind that Deepak Jolly was being made fun of in that sense, if you know what I mean. But
and he basically, Mike got in the cricket and the culture, sometimes I would say even better than some of the Indian cricket writers did, because he saw it from bottom up rather than seeing it from top down. And then he goes to all these places and eats this spicy Indian food, and I'm worrying for him. Is your tummy okay? I mean, this is 1996 we're talking about, but this guy is just going and relishing like the most spicy food in street corners and all that.
Bhajiyas and everything, and and like, you would worry about him, and he was like, so it was almost like, he was those 60s kind of hippies who would come to India. He had like that kind of a soul and a spirit, in that sense. Peace, love, and brotherhood man type, So that's what everyone. And I was trying to think of him at the Wankhede Stadium. So I don't know whether I'm imagining it now or whether he was just sort of friendly with everybody that was there, including the chaiwala. He had that, and he was very relaxed about it. He was a very relaxed kind of an observer in that sense, and he was much more relaxed at the time because there was not so much of, you didn't need an accreditation to go to Wankhede Stadium to watch a Ranji match, that kind of a thing. So it was just, it was his personality in a way that comes through in the book also, because of this sort of absolute ease with which he is, and he's not judgmental in any way that doesn't have a reason. He's not just passing blind mad judgment.
Yeah,
that's so true, right? When you're talking about not being judgmental without a reason, I think throughout the book, for almost like even the Marxist lens that Fidel mentioned about earlier, you get that right through. But for someone with a Marxist lens, a 96 World Cup is basically the perfect platform for you to write all your haughty opinions on, right? Because it had everything going for you, right? Crass commercialization, taking a sober gentleman game and making this hyper-nationalist sort of drive to commercialization and all that. But in fact, for someone with a Marxist lens, his perspective on the World Cup and the commercial aspects of the World Cup are so fair and so distant, and primarily as an observer rather than as a judge. It came across, in fact, except for his stance of the anything but England, which is a strand that runs right through the book, which you can possibly call it a tad unfair, possibly. But almost all of the judges.
Head unfair, but like 100% fun. And we're here for all of it.
Exactly. Yeah. But otherwise, his take on even the so-called embracing of the markets and the private market, sort of private enterprises and the whole. He has a criticism about IMF dictating much of the choices that the governments made in Asia. And in fact, for me, it was very revealing, right? I mean, particularly, you would have seen this narrative about Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao, opening up the shackles of the public economy to a private economy, creating this massive economic momentum for India. But, like what he clearly observes right through is it was a choice imposed on all the Asian economies by IMF. It is not a choice that anybody voluntarily took. And that in turn created different pathways for different economies. And in fact, talking of that, even about, he makes a very sharp observation about the different cricket cultures in India and Pakistan. And there's always a tendency to orientalize that, right? There's always to go for the ethnic sort of reasoning. But he says, despite sort of common ethnicity, these are such different cultures, primarily because of the political and economic system that they adopted since becoming independent countries. And after the IMF imposed opening up of the economy, they took even particularly sharper sort of trajectory since then. So I think his Marxist prism is there, but it is at such a distance, and very rarely, like Sharda mentioned, he judges without a reason. So all that is captured with a sharp observation, but hardly any sort of judgment of an outsider.
Yeah, I mean, he mentions one of the lines that he phrases that he uses is how Indian cricket in the subcontinent is an eccentricity within an eccentricity. And Mike's writing is pretty much that. I mean, he takes Iqbal, the poet, then he goes further into Iqbal's politics, then he goes into the history, then he goes into that, and then he's like, okay, now I'm sitting in the stadium in Faisalabad. So he's gone in like several layers, and then he's come out of it again.
And all in one page, right? And the other thing that I found amazing, especially on the second reading, is that we talk a lot about CLR James and how his writing on cricket went beyond cricket. And, or if you have to go outside of cricket, for instance, another sort of epic book that a lot of us talk about is Levels of the Game. The big difference between those kind of books and this one is that it weighs its erudition very, very lightly. Like when you're reading CLR James, you know he's making a big hypothesis and he's putting it out there for you to learn from, right? And even with Levels of the Game, there's a conscious effort to do this, taking a micro picture and dialing further inside and slightly taking a detour and kind of coming back to that point. And that's built at a sort of structural level itself, the book's structural level. But this one takes its erudition so lightly. And even when he touches upon all these sort of detours, it's with a light touch and he comes back to the point and keeps making those razor-sharp observations along the way.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about CLR James is it's like basically like, okay, sit down, let me teach you something, right? It's like, okay, you have to learn, boy, now you sit. And then, the very fact of him saying, what do they know of cricket, only cricket? No, it's like, obviously you can't know about cricket without knowing beyond the boundary. But Mike, it's almost like he's saying, how can you know about cricket without knowing, about stuff beyond cricket?
Yeah, or like you can't know about cricket, and it's very difficult to know cricket fully unless you know everything.
Yeah, and it's almost like he's tapping on the back and he's saying, now why don't you listen to me, rather than CLR James saying, okay, sit, boy, sit. So, and the other thing about him is that, other thing that is totally obviously different from CLR James is that Mike is actually doing a lot of journalism through the book. He's talking to so many people. He's talking to Omar Qureshi, people like Ramchandra Guha, and so many people connected to the game. And so there's a serious journalism that's running through the book as well. It's not just like a book of, like it's not a Jamesian book in that sense.
No, I was just going to make the quick point that he very rarely quotes an anthropologist or historian. It's always, he's almost like a contemporary kind of like chronicler, because he's pulling together like news clippings, all this kind of stuff. He doesn't lean on academia. He leans on journalism, and that I found that really refreshing and fun as well, because you would expect a book like this, you'd think about any book that talks about cricket from a social-political perspective. It generally leans heavily on kind of academia that's already been done, but this isn't like that. He's pulling together headlines from all sorts of Pakistani and Indian newspapers. First of all, he's having Urdu and Hindi and Bengali kind of translated. It all just kind of he's just building the world as it was in '96, rather than leaning on someone else's work, which I found really interesting.
Whatever he says, the really weighty things that he says just comes up when you don't expect it. Like I'm quoting a thing about he's sitting in this place in Sri Lanka. He's saying, drinking my lion beer in the company of cricket crazy waiters. He's talking to the waiters who are serving him. And then he says, thinking of the legacy of Satasivam, who was like a really famous Sri Lankan batsman back then. He said, I quote, I began to draw together the threads that make up Sri Lankan cricket. Elitist amateurism, cavalier batsmanship, relaxed sociability, and hedonism. And then that's it, full stop, over. He moves on. And
I was reading that line. I was thinking about the earlier podcast that we did with asked him to talk about the three great Sri Lankan batting innings in recent times. We're talking about Kushal Mendes' century against Australia, and then
Chandimal.
Chandimal against India. I was thinking about both those innings when I read those lines. It perfectly fits in even now.
Yeah, can I tell you like what was really infuriating for me reading this is that like I've covered Sri Lankan cricket, full time for almost 9 years, and there's one 2-word phrase. He's talking about Arjuna and Aravind batting in the final, where he calls it relaxed hedonism. And damn, if there's no better 2-word descriptor of Sri Lankan cricket than that. And I am so mad at this guy for coming up with it. And I've covered cricket here for so long, and this guy just nailed the Sri Lankan, like just the perfect descriptor of Sri Lankan cricket in 2 words, just infuriating beyond words.
Yeah, and it's like he says this and it moves on, but then you have to stop, right? You have to be like, okay, wait, he's just made like a sensational point. I need to think about this.
No, it's almost like in a way that he's like very different to Roebuck, but very same in the sense of able to say very simple things. I mean, very complex things in very simple language, and layers of things in very simple language. So that's what I thought about when you're talking about relaxed hedonism. Maybe Roebuck would not have used relaxed hedonism, he would have said something else. But that's the thing. So you say something complex very simply and then you just go on, It's like,
No,
and we are down in the profundity of it, but, you're just said it and moved on,
And talking about that relaxed hedonism, I mean, which of course is like a perfect description of the Aravinda and Arjuna's batting and the whole Sri Lankan ethos. My favorite, I mean, that is a brilliant line, but my favorite description in the book is of that small sentence that he writes of Asanka Gurusingha. And, listeners, you might not have even seen Asanka Gurusingha as a batsman. You might not know anything about him. But, he writes, this is the sentence he writes, this laconic bear of a batsman exudes leafy strength. And that's enough. You just know Asanka Gurusingha with that one sentence.
Laconic bear of a batsman. Yeah, it's pretty much, it's exactly how, it's perfect. It's really perfect.
I mean, it's like, it's almost like you spend your whole life watching cricket and then you suddenly come across this guy who's actually figured it all out. What the hell?
And so easy. What do you think? And so easily. He's done it so easily. And this is not like the only book he'll write for the rest of his life. He'll write like stuff on Ali and on Dylan and on, many other things. This is just one of the many dozens of books he's written. It's really annoying.
It is so annoying. I mean, I'll read another line. I mean, every page has marked stuff up. I'll read another line when he talks about, that famous West Indies Kenya match, which Sharda, of course, I want to get her in at some point. But he says, I quote, Ambrose came to the wicket looking as if he resented even being there. He glanced around with dull, irritated eyes. Once again, his teammates had let him down. Was he expected to win the match with bat as well as ball? And that's it, right? You might not have known anything about Ambrose, but you know the kind of guy he was when he was batting. That dull, irritated eyes. I would have never written that. But what a line!
If you'd have written that in the Hindu, it would have been cut out by the way. For me, for sure.
So talking about that match, which of course is my favorite part of the book, it's simply because, of all the games in that World Cup, Mike found himself in that match where Kenya beat West Indies. And Sharda, you also luckily found yourself in that match.
Yeah.
So, tell us about that and that chapter and generally that match itself. It must have been like some other feeling to be there.
Crazy. Clayton was also there, right? So that match took place. I think we traveled. So India lost to Australia. I think in Bombay. Am I right?
Yeah.
Lost.
Yeah.
I remember Mark getting Tendulkar stumped off a wide. And the next morning, we took the bus to go to Pune. I took the bus to go to Pune, and Clayton and whoever landed up later, taxi, whatever. And the day after that was that match. Now Pakistan was playing South Africa on the same day. And so nobody was going to be interested in West Indies versus Kenya. It was going to be a cakewalk. It was going to finish. And then the match began to turn. Then the Kenyans sort of came back into it. And they had that giant wicket keeper.
Tariq Iqbal.
Yeah. He was like he was just, I was wondering, what is a description for him? he was just square. The wicketkeeper was there, and of course they were defending the score. And what happened after at lunchtime? There were no spectators, so they threw the gates open to the crowd. This is a World Cup match, mind you, and all the students, African students, Kenyan students, there were lots of them in Pune because there are a lot of colleges and there are a lot of educational institutions there, and foreign students come. They suddenly heard that this was happening, and they started to come into the ground, and they started singing in one of the stands. And it was just like, and at that time, everyone who was watching the South Africa match, there was a TV behind it. This great Nehru Stadium we were sitting actually inside the Maharashtra Cricket Association office, which was the press box. We were sitting there and looking at the match, and behind us there was a TV, and no one was watching Pakistan versus South Africa anymore. And it just grew into this big thing that the great West Indians, they made the semi-finals in that. That was the last time they made. This is the last time they made semi-finals, the West Indies in this.
Yeah.
And so they were still a team. They were not completely gone. They were still a considerable team. Shane Warne stopped them finally in the semi-final.
And they stopped themselves also.
Successfully. Yeah. And there was this crazy match going on, and that they were going to get beaten. And the West Indies had a sort of arrogance about them, in that I remember we were at the press, we were at the pre-match, we were trying to speak, and they were just not paying attention, and it was just very, they were sort of the West Indies who were very good, but not at a level, they weren't the great West Indies, they were the very good West Indies who were pretending like they were the great West Indies. And behaving in a different way and so on. And then this game happened. And then and Lara was there, and just everything went. I still have the score sheet somewhere when I'm sitting. And everything went crazy. And at that time, because you knew that you were going to be told that yours is going to be the lead story of the newspaper the next day. So you're getting more and more nervous and anxious, and the match is going on. And you didn't want it to go the other. At one point, you actually wanted the West Indies to lose. You said, can it please be this way? I don't remember. I know that Mike was there. He may have been sitting at the end of this thing and all that, but I have no memory of him being around in that match other than having dinner with us before, with Clayton and me the night before, and then this thing coming out in the book. The chapter coming out. And it was just the most incredible game. Incredible.
He might have been with the Kenyan students or something in this time.
Possibly. Yeah.
And Tariq Iqbal, by the way, which Mike mentioned, saying that Iqbal was such a cumbersome fielder, they only decided to, the only place they could afford to put him was behind the stumps.
Yeah. He was huge. It's almost like he was like that Leverock sort of proportions. Not that big as Leverock, but sort of like that. But he pulled off a catch. So
he was a mixture of Leverock and Hirwani.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Well, what did you make of that chapter? Did you like it as much as I did? I mean, that is my favorite chapter of the book.
Yeah, I did love it. I think just the level of hijinks that he kind of brought to it as well. Actually, my favorite chapter was the one on the ads and commercialism, just because it was so original and so unlike
the cola wars and all that.
The cola wars. I just thought, it was completely bloodless in a way that he was not telling a human story at all. So it shouldn't be a chapter that I liked, and yet that was one that I just kind of absolutely devoured, because I'd just not seen anybody write so completely about how the commercial world interacts with the cricket world, and kind of a critique of kind of cricket capitalism. I just hadn't read something as comprehensive as that. And we've since been through 25 years of cricket writing. I'm not sure that we've had writing on cricket capitalism like that. And that's what I found that was a remarkable chapter. Not it doesn't have this great story, but just as just kind of like an intellectual exercise, just working out how money is affecting cricket. And then later on he ties it back. I think the last couple of chapters he ties it back to how globalism, how kind of nationalism is kind of a product or a child of globalism, and how all these companies are kind of feeding off it and feeding into it, actually. So The Pepsi ads in it's the same company, but the Pepsi ads in Pakistan and Pepsi ads in India are very much playing off their rival nationalisms and obviously making money for the parent company. And the way he broke that down, I thought was fascinating and just said so much about so much that was beyond cricket and so much about beyond sport. I thought that was in a way the most memorable. I don't think I will forget that chapter.
I think what was really appealing about that book was that he was able to tap into the feeling that they grew in the World Cup in that World Cup at the time. That was growing because of the fact that the Sri Lankans had the West Indies and the Australians didn't go on tour there, and that it was this joint World Cup which they had again in 2011, but that's not the same sort of thing. And it's like he had tapped into that feeling. So he was writing in a way that was almost responding to the sentiments we had at the time. But he was writing in a way where he was looking at all these various things and building blocks of how that World Cup came to be. And mind you, these are very, very early years of Indian commercialism in cricket, and it wasn't being said, he wasn't writing it in a way that he was just looking at it as a process that was taking place in front of his eyes, and he was telling you what it was going to become. I think I would have loved to have him interview Lalit Modi. It would have been the most hysterical interview you would ever had of him.
I don't think even Lalit Modi wouldn't have been able to take that.
No chance. He would have just, yeah.
Talking of Lalit Modi, there's one particular chapter. I think this was about the Gwalior match, India-West Indies, where he talks about. Basically that was on the back of Hawala, and Madhur of Scindia is fighting off all the repercussions of that. He was not even given a seat by Narasimha Rao, and then he uses the successful staging of that game to make a political statement. Right, all the naysays have been proven wrong or whatever. I was imagining that to be very, very similar to the Lalit Modi speech in the last IPL before he was chucked out, right? Where there was so much political pressure against him, and he uses the stage of the IPL final, and Shastri happily gives him the stage. Like, there were so many parallels, right? Even in terms of the Bombay versus Mumbai chapter, right? There's so much about how Shiv Sena was turning the Hindutva party. It was always parochial, but it was turning Hindutva. And a lot of that, especially now when you look at the prison now, it seems funny that they are seen as the lesser of the devils. And sometimes they even come across as a liberal party relatively.
They're shifting slightly.
Yeah, the shifting. The political angle is extremely important. With what we've seen over the last few years. 96, what Mike has written in relation to cricket, when he talks about the India-Pakistan match in Bangalore and the sort of friction he saw then, the animosity, the triumphalism that he experienced after that. It's all very instructive as to how that whole... Exactly. It was almost the nascent stages of that. See, because India went out of the World Cup in 87 also. India lost the semi-final. But it was not like there were any major crowd disturbance or riots when they did. But within a period of 9 years, you can see the Indian crowds and the evolution, and what Sharda has spoken about when she wrote that piece. The Indian crowds had changed, for sure.
Yeah. And it's like the post-liberalization period. So all the nationalism that the big corporations will start to sell to you, they had started to sell, And I remember going to a match in the 87 World Cup. It was a Motera match in Motera. It may have been Motera's first one-dayer. I'm not sure whether it was the first test or whatever. It was a one-day. And I was the only person in the stand carrying a flag. It was very difficult to go and buy an Indian flag anywhere. You had to go to Khadi Mandar to buy it. And in 87, I was the only person maybe in the whole stadium carrying a flag.
Wow. And look where we are now.
Look where we are now.
Wow.
It was very difficult to buy flags, and I had, you have those old television areas which are made of aluminium. You could break them, and I could carry it in. There was no security or whatever, and I carried it in, and the flag was on it. And people were looking at me stupid, like, why are you waving the flag? Who is this deranged person waving a flag?
Yeah. It's just, the thing about the Cola chapter, though, which I want to get back to Fidel, is that, the best part about that chapter for me is that, he's just, he points out so clearly how both Coke, which was the official sponsor and which was doing like, their own, trying to sell the game through the way that it was like the official game. Ha. And Pepsi, which was taking the other road, saying nothing official about it, but he basically surgically carves both of them up, saying both of them are wrong. It's like, it's not like he's taking one particular side and saying, see, Pepsi did the great thing and they ambushed them. But he's saying even that ambush is had a cynical side to it.
Yeah,
Even that,
Yeah, exactly. So what is it? The word is cynicism. So we should be looking at advertising and corporate involvement in cricket with a certain amount of cynicism. And but what has become now is that you think, oh, they have invested so much money. Oh, they have invested so much money more. Oh, we have now a $7 billion business or whatever. So there's no in a way objectivity about how finance is used in sport, or finance is used to manipulate sport also as well.
Yeah,
but that's
and in terms of Pepsi and Coke, like the sheer ludicrousness of this like multinational, soft drink company trying to kind of gain credence by or gaining credence by suggesting it's unofficial or fun, and like trying to kind of corporatize informality, which is like absolutely antithetical to like the whole way a massive multinational corporation is structured and the way it functions.
Also, both the companies, Fidel, they were the biggest sponsors in Sharjah. There was all that sort of really angry Indo-Pak feeling during the little tournaments. All that they were competing for was the Coca-Cola Cup or the Pepsi Cup, the Pepsi Cup or the Coca-Cola Cup. So I used to call them fizzy drinks cup, and they were absolutely pointless. So, and it had started. It was there in the 90s all the time. It was these two same companies doing this. Bad for health also.
Yeah.
So I do want to the politics and economics and this whole encyclopedic worldview is obviously drives so much of the book, but there is also some exceptional quote unquote cricket writing in the book. I mean, the passages of play, whether it's talking about Tendulkar's innings in Mumbai, where against Australia, or Aravinda De Silva's batting, especially in Calcutta, there is, again, it is cricket writing that you don't read in traditional cricket writing reports. The words, the phrases, the manner in which Mike has been able to describe, say, a shot, or it's so different, isn't it, Chada? And I wouldn't even say it's an American way of writing, because people don't even write about baseball and other sports in that way. It's so original.
Because it's freed. I mean, it has no baggage that he's carrying, that it has to be written in a particular way. He is describing what he is seeing with a completely fresh slate. He's looking at it in a way that it's not been slotted into some, not a formula, but you have to describe a particular shot in a particular way, or you fall back on cliches, and he has come into it fresh. So it's like he's seeing a completely new game, and that is the most brilliant part about it, that it's like, oh, I never thought of it like this, but yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what that shot is like, or what that dismissal is like, or what that little passage of play is like. And the ability to play with words and with description and memory of what you saw, because eventually he's not writing this in the stadium. He's writing this, I assume, a day or two later. He's made some notes. Maybe they're the notes that I wish I'd talked to him about this. He's sort of picked it up from notes that he's written at the time. It's quite astonishing, but it also frees you up. It also frees up a writer later to say, listen, I can write this in this way, and it doesn't have to sound absurd, because there's no rules now anymore for how cricket can be written, you know.
Yeah, Fidel, you have quoted him when he talks about that Ian Healy dismissal in the World Cup final. That wonderful line about, almost as if a fish catching, I mean, basically baiting a fish. But yeah, your thoughts about the cricket writing itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that Sharda said. It's again a book that I kind of wish I'd read earlier, just because when you start writing about cricket, there's kind of like a formula or a template which you're supposed to follow, and Mike Marquis doesn't follow any of those conventions. I just today, while I was just going through it, I read about him talking about Tendulkar's bowling and how Tendulkar was bowling cutters, he was bowling offies, he was bowling leg breaks, he was bowling seam up deliveries, and he called him like a junk bowler, which is kind of a phrase borrowed from baseball, but it fits perfectly because he's just bowling all sorts of like just absolute trash deliveries, but because it's like varied enough trash that the batsman finds it hard to hit him. Like it's a great description, and I think I just wish we had we were as cricket writers, we were less kind of reliant on the same old tropes that we often write about. I'm guilty of this, a lot of others are guilty of this, where we use very, very similar language to describe the same kind of thing. But this is really refreshing coming from someone else, coming from someone who doesn't have kind of that like strong cricket writing background. But yeah, I like you was kind of mesmerized by those passages as well, less so than the political kind of insights, but they were fun to read.
Yeah, and they sort of, it's a great mix because you have this sort of the politics and the economics and everything that's making like such profound points. And then you have this such a light touch about the cricket writing and so original. I mean, that line I was talking about, I just found it now. It says, De Silva tossed the ball in the air like an expert angler dangling a fly in front of a trout's nose. I mean, how would you ever read that in a cricket report? You would never read it. But this is so correct. That's exactly how De Silva would have done it. It. And then he says, there are times when he talks about in the Delhi match, I think he says how Ranatunga permuted the spinners. I mean, these are words that you don't see in cricket reports. And it's so nice to read something like this. And then immediately he will go back to talking about the whole politics of the situation. And you're like, wow, this is amazing.
So the way he wrote about the Aravinda's innings, right, in semi-final is, one is to describe. I mean, we all know what a genius he was, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of describing his genius. So on his day, he could have done anything. This was his day. You bowl him anywhere, and he'll hit you anywhere, and whatever. But he's specifically dissecting the beauty of the innings so beautifully. Prasad bowled in a particular spot. He hit him to the leg. Next, the captain moved the field. Then he hit him over score of the wicket. Then he hit him further straighter. He's essentially describing exactly what Aravinda was doing and why he was simply unstoppable that day. And then he had the clinch, as if he didn't say enough. He sums it up in one line saying, this was test match batting at an accelerated pace.
Yeah. I think he said it was an exhibition of applied trigonometry because
yes,
Aravinda didn't hit in the air, which was like the whole Sri Lankan ethos was hitting in the air during the first 15 overs. And Aravinda just played the safest, most aggressive innings, like the most aggressive, safe innings he could play. And applied trigonometry is like the perfect way to say that because it was his placement that like really set that innings apart. Was that he just picked the gaps in the field beautifully. And again, it's just a perfect description.
Yeah, applied trigonometry. So yeah, anyone who is even remotely interested in cricket writing, the passages. I mean, I think each and every match passage I've probably underlined most of it. I mean, there's a bit about Tendulkar in Mumbai where he talks about
Tendulkar-Marquardt comparison was quite beautiful, right? I mean, in the same match, and two great modern batsmen of their times, and like when we were talking about it at that time, we didn't talk of them as contrast as such, right? Both were, I mean, Sachin was not Jayasuriya. So to kind of contrast him with Marquardt and say that he was batting more classical style, whereas Sachin was batting with impudence, itself was a prism that most of us will not apply on. We would rather look at Jayasuriya and Marquardt as the opposites, not so much Tendulkar and Marquardt. And the other thing that I observed about his writing on the particular Mumbai match is how he viewed the one-day cricket evolution as a way forward for the game, and how he said how he kind of, I mean, he doesn't take the Puritan sort of view, right? He doesn't say, okay, well, for all its beauty or for all its joy and thrill of one-day cricket, Test cricket is Test cricket. He doesn't go into that trope. He's saying one-day cricket is basically taking the game forward by taking the draw out of the equation. And he also highlights how day-night cricket and the lights add to that impact and the frenzy. So it is not a simple, lazy, I mean, you could argue that Marxist sort of prism wouldn't allow for it, but it does, right? That's what, like Sharda mentioned, everything that he says has a reason, both good and bad. And even his criticism of the commercial aspects are so razor sharp. It is not a lazy Oriental thing saying, oh, cricket was better in those days. He's comparing the British insurance sponsorship in county to whatever we see in the subcontinent. And his critique is a lot more grounded on first principles and theory and logic than just a wishful thinking of the past.
I mean, he goes so much, into the comparisons that after the Calcutta semi-final, when the whole stadium is like, when the match has been forfeited, there are bottles being thrown, crowd is being cleared. Mike is like, yeah, but I've seen worse in English football games.
I loved that take though. Like, it was so, everything I'd read about that Calcutta match is about, India's great shame and India's kind of like this chastising, this like self-flagellation over this. And Marcus is like, yeah, it wasn't that bad, guys. All of these bad things have happened. And, lighting fires in the stadium, that's actually normal for Indian stadiums, that happens after victories. And the reason why most bottles were plastic and like they were half full is so that they could use them for ballast and they could go further. It was so, and then him contrasting that with kind of like Pakistan's self-flagellation after their loss to India, the previous match, and talking about kind of nationalism as this kind of like this thing that drives nations to unfairly view themselves as well. Sometimes the shame isn't a shame. It was just a few. It was a few. Most of the people in that stand left early. In that stadium left early, were kind of embarrassed by it all.
Fidel, there's a great line here, which I'm just reading. It says, the crowd, even the bottle throwers, clapped and cheered the Lankans off the field, but booed the Indians and especially Azhar and calmly wept. And now, I don't remember there being this thing of the Lankans being cheered. I only remember calmly weeping, and I remember Azhar getting booed. And I'm thinking, yeah, obviously you're sitting there, so you've seen everything. You watched it and you've recorded it, But like Bell is saying that it is, all that was remembered was the self-flagellation that, oh God, we have brought disgrace upon ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was that particular like riot that he kind of used the word riot critically as well. That particular incident was kind of a protest against like India's abject performance in that match, rather than like something much more malicious against Sri Lanka or whatever. And it's an important point to make, because like sometimes the self-flagellation can become so it's important to be self-critical, but when you're being that critical about something that necessarily doesn't deserve that level of criticism, it becomes self-defeating as well. So that was a really refreshing portion of the book, because I'd never read that take on that particular incident, that there were so many Indians in that stand, so many Indians. And also he talks about how like the police were completely ineffective, right? So the police at no stage shut any of this down. The Calcutta police. But he says the police all through the tournament, because at when Sri Lanka win the World Cup, there's like 7,000 people on that ground, and like police are like 1% of them. And he's like, yeah, the major trend through this World Cup is that police have been like largely ineffective and useless. But like a good police squadron could have shut what happened in Calcutta down. But they didn't, and so many people left, and they had to shut the game down. But does it need to be this scene of abject self-reflection?
And what's remarkable is that for somebody who's attending a game and who's covering a game, it's very difficult to put your finger on the motivations behind something like this, but the fact is that it requires a lot of work. And so here's Mike, who has gone, not only seen what has happened in front of him, but then he goes and
Yeah.
speaks to people. He
Yeah.
speaks to them saying, why do you think this happened? And then he sort of triangulates and he puts it together and he says, yeah, obviously you have like a 1,500 rupee ticket stand where the tickets are going for 5,000 rupees. So
Yeah.
a person is paying like three and a half times the amount. He's going and sitting there. So there's also this frustration that's coming out. It's not necessarily that, Sri Lanka winning, so let's pelt them with bottles. It's also like I am suffering here because I've lost my money and my team is doing this to me. And it takes a profound level of empathy and understanding and journalism to figure that out in a matter of a few hours. It's not
Yeah.
easy. I mean, anyone
And
who's
not
covered the
fast.
game will just, yeah.
And not pass judgment on the people who who are angry. They may not have thrown bottles, but they're angry. Then they're annoyed. Yeah.
It's just kind of like a masterclass of putting everything in its complete context. Like who would have thought to, once you see something like this, to go and think about how much someone paid for the ticket, right? Like
Yeah.
that is such a crazy thought to me, that you see a crowd misbehaving and you go and ask them, look, how much over the stated price did you pay for your ticket? I mean,
No, and then you see
that
the
is such
crowd
an
misbehaving, and then
such an
the fundamental point. Sorry for interrupting. The fundamental
Yeah,
point is you see a crowd misbehaving, and then you go ask them, "Why are you misbehaving?" I mean, that itself takes so much. Yeah.
Yeah, just like curiosity and just an ability to see beyond the kind of prima facie facts, right? Like the obvious facts, and to see, okay, there's an economic element to this, there's a political element to this, there might be a religious element to this, there's like all sorts of class contentions, and just to bring all of that together, and that's kind of what makes the book.
And in fact, even one is what happened in Calcutta. And the other point that, in fact, Sidvi had mentioned in one of our retro pods on 96 World Cup, when he was there at the quarterfinals, is about what could have happened in Bangalore had the result been different. And to some extent, in fact, the way he writes about the crowd reaction right through the match, the oscillation of the crowd reaction, right, of both the so-called gentlemanly Bangalore crowd as well as the Pakistan hi kind of chants coming in between, and whatever anti-Myanmar stands, and Ram Guha's comments about how his fellow sort of members at the club stand didn't even stand up for Myanmar's last match, and so on. So he captures that the oscillation of the sentiment and how it varies right through. It's not one thing, right? It's not like this crowd came here to make trouble, but they see Anwar and Sohail batting like that. And then on top of it, add all those other elements that have been building up for a while, like holding the tickets and not making it available, coming in and getting slapped and whatever. All those adds up. And in fact, Sidvi, you should add on that, on how you felt something could have happened when you were there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's another moment which, that I was blown away with, the insight that he came up. Because, I was, of course, I was young then, and I was not covering the game. I was just watching the game. But there was some kind of unease that enveloped you at the start of the Pakistan chase. And when Anwar and Sohail were batting, that I think 84 in 10 overs, which was like back in 96, 84 in 10 overs was like insane run rate. And it was terrifying run rate, and the absolute pin drop silence. Nobody was clapping, and there was an edge. You knew that if this continues for another half an hour, and if Pakistan are say like 150 or something, you knew that something could happen and something really bad could happen. And in fact, there were even people around me. I mean, there were older people who were saying that, we should get going, and this is not going to end well. And that kind of sentiment was coming in. And for Mike to then see that, to feel that, to then talk to people and then bring it all together into this amazing, essay, full-fledged essay format. I mean, forget back when I was 15, I couldn't have done that even today. I mean, I couldn't have gone to a match like that and picked out the political and sort of the feeling and all the resonances that he brings forth. I can't do it even today. And it's amazing that he was able to see it and grasp what it meant. I mean, probably it was his, the fact that he had seen not only sporting encounters that were so charged, but also political situations that were so charged. I mean, he would have seen, so many strikes, and he would have seen, all the.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
his political life, he was a protester. He'd been
In
to
his political life, he was a protester. Exactly. So he would have seen
he was a demonstrator.
situations.
He'd been to all these things, since he was
Yeah.
a very boy.
And he was even part of the protesters during the time when they protested the Vietnam War in the US and all that. So I guess that must have played a big role, because he understood crowds better than so many people, and he understood that whether it's a cricket crowd or whether it's a political crowd or whether it's a football crowd, he sort of knew that there were the motivations that were driving them, and it was not just partisanship but also economics, also politics, also what they were being fed on a daily basis. And that is a remarkable view to come to.
And what he recognized as like a pan-global similarity between crowd behavior, to see that this kind of thing happens across cultures, across countries, this sort of feeling of a crowd responding. It's interesting what you say about the match, the quarterfinals, because I don't think Bangalore had ever responded to a game like that. I don't think
it hadn't, Sharda, but there was during the Tamil Nadu Karnataka Ranji Trophy matches, things got heated. And in fact, there was a one-day match between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka during the heights of the Kaveri, where people threw chairs and match had to be this. Yeah, there was a lot of issues there. So the Bangalore crowd could, on its day, they could get pretty.
The majestic side of them would take over.
Exactly, yeah, on that day.
On that day. Majestic would take over Cubbon Park.
Yeah, so.
I also want to say something really outrageous here, but he's probably the only Western writer who cherishes Ram Guha's friendship, who takes his opinion seriously, and yet doesn't take his word on Indian cricket as a final word. Even in this chapter on the quarterfinals, one, he takes Ram Guha's view that, he was the only one cheering for Myanmar. And then he also takes Ram Guha's views on how people are celebrating like mad people outside. And this whole nationalism force comes through. But he actually ends the chapter by saying, the Bangalore crowd's reaction is, in some ways condemnable, but also it gives me hope, because if you look at the broader picture, they kind of carry themselves pretty well. So in the sense, he's probably the only Western writer who's not going to just take a view from Ram Guha and pass it on as the final word, which I was really relieved by. I mean, if I wanted Ram Guha's opinion, I would read his book. I wouldn't read your book.
I love that as well, because generally, and when people are writing about a culture that's not their own, the tendency is just to kind of defer to the experts. And generally you think, the people who are there, who've done the work, are the experts. And Marcus, he doesn't actually, takes, gives you what the expert thinks or give you what they think. But at the end of the day, he kind of says, look, but there's this stuff that I've been thinking about, that I've seen, that runs counter to that, which is fascinating. I just wanted to read like one little bit that I really, just on this theme of what we've been talking about, when he talks about Mark Taylor at the end of the World Cup, and he's asked, after they've lost the final, why, about boycotting the match in Colombo, and Mark Taylor says, and I'm quoting from the book, people tell us when we're here that we have to understand other people's cultures, and we try very hard to do that. But I'd like people to look at things from both sides. Put yourselves in our shoes and look at the way we live in Australia compared to the way other people in the live in the subcontinent. Now, anyone from South Asia listening to Mark Taylor say that immediately feels uneasy, because there's something wrong about what he's saying, right? Especially like as a Sri Lankan reading it all these years later, I'm just like, screw that guy, right? Like that's the thing that comes to my.
What is wrong with you? And Mark Taylor was a big hero. I'm listening to this and saying, what? Yeah.
And Marcus breaks down exactly the feeling of uneasiness that I have reading that. He says, let me find. Underlying his appeal to multicultural tolerance was the assumption that mutilation and sudden death were intrinsic to South Asian culture and alien to Western culture. And it's just such a like clinical breakdown of what is wrong with what Mark Taylor said and why we feel badly towards people saying stuff like that. And that, I think, is just that awareness of, and in that same passage, he talks about, how, a couple of weeks after the World Cup, a gunman shoots down 35 people in Tasmania, how later in the year, the Atlanta Olympics is, there's a bomb going off there. And so he brings in all the faults of Western culture and places them alongside, what's going wrong in South Asia, and compares them and says, look, are these two things so radically different that one of these cultures is looking down constantly on the other? And that I think is just like such a valuable perspective, and one of the things I appreciate the most about the book.
And I just want to point out, at that time, this is in the mid-90s, it was almost accepted for people in South Asia it was almost expected of people in South Asia to accept this view. That, listen, their lives are much better, and hello, it's okay, there are bombs going off, they cannot afford, their lives are very important, they cannot. So we were so outraged at the idea that Australia and West Indies were not coming to Sri Lanka for the World Cup. I mean, it was like an insult taken almost personally. I'm saying this like completely my personal response. Maybe I was just one very rabid anti-colonial mindset I was going into. But it was that. And when Mike wrote like this, or wrote off this, or even somebody, it was very rare to see this kind of writing from what we would think of as the other side or the other culture. But he was not that other culture. He was himself. He was Mike. He said these things in a complete, which is why anyone but England came. It was like he said, yes, this is what we've been thinking about English cricket for so long, that we were tired of being talked down to it. And this is just slightly before the sort of around the time that Australia were going to start their, the Australian way of playing it. It was just before this, but it captured what had been such a visceral thing for us to have to live with, for people from the subcontinent, from Asia to live with, in terms of how cricket was looked at and what was decided. Of course, right now at the moment we are in a place that it's completely turned upside down. And now whatever we say, whatever India says in cricket is supposed to be the gospel. But in 1996, it was definitely not so.
Yeah, and so coming to that point about, 1996 and how, that was probably the beginning of the end, as you yourself mentioned, this whole Asian solidarity. Can you ever imagine a time when India and Pakistan host an event together? I mean, in the near future. I mean, I can't. Yeah. And a World Cup being played across 3 countries, and then India, the final going to Lahore. I'm like, are you insane? This is never going to happen in 200 years. India giving a World Cup final to a country other than itself. Yeah, and to Pakistan to add to it.
One of the kind of endearing aspects of it was how they had the unity match, where kind of South Asian solidarity was seen in like full force before the tournament began. Azhar and Wasim bring the teams, and then they go into like full nationalism mode for this quarterfinal. They go into suddenly they're like split apart again, and then once they're both eliminated and Sri Lanka are the last team, suddenly it's all South Asian solidarity again. Like everyone comes together again. So it's nice to Sri Lanka as this kind of neutral observer,
the unifying factor. Yeah.
Tightrope walking between kind of like these 2 massive lava pits.
I must tell you, the 2 massive lava pits. My father has a Pakistani friend, and we've constantly been telling them that, listen, they have to meet. And he's not seen them since, I think, for at least 40, 50 years now. And so there's a plan for us to go and meet in Sri Lanka, because we can both get so easy.
Everyone gets visas here.
Everyone gets visas. And Indians and Pakistanis can meet each other there. They're to each other's country. Off topic, but still.
And talking about Indians and Pakistanis, I mean, there is also this very passage at the end of it where he talks about how, the whole Sahara Cup in Toronto was being planned around that time. But then again, he figures out so quickly that it is not about going and spreading the game there. It's about the TV audiences maximizing the prime time in India. Yeah. And, again, that's something that I mean, back then, everyone was, there was this whole talk about popularizing the game in North America and all that, but Mike just sees through that in no time. He's like, no, this is BS.
And the fact that it's called the Friendship Cup, and he's like, well, if you're really friends, you'd be playing in each other's countries.
Yeah. And,
Or not in bloody Canada, you know.
and I think maybe that it is where his awareness. I mean, he left the US when he was about 18 or 19 years old, but his awareness of American sport through this business of TV rights and selling and whatever, that was at its height. I mean, that was like literally had just begun to roll into play at the time, which is probably why he was able to see it. He said, I can see this, 25,000 miles away. This is what it is. It's got nothing to do. It's just about your TV rights. We understand it completely. So he could have, he saw through all the marketing before they could even get their advertising pitch on the road. He was able to see through it,
Yeah, I mean, Mike Marquesi is the guy who every advertising and marketing agency should consult before they do something, because he would tell them all the BS that they're doing immediately. I mean, they can't consult him now, but they should.
They'll be reduced to joblessness because he's going to cut through all their bullshit.
What is a mile away?
So just to go back on the point of solidarity, Asian solidarity particularly, on the friendship match that happened before the World Cup started, the combined India-Pakistan 11, he makes an observation in the book about Kalu Tarana being caught by Tendulkar and bowled Wasim Akram. And as the bowler and fielder ran to embrace each other, it was hard to believe that not 24 hours before, Indian and Pakistani troops were exchanging fires across the disputed Kashmir border. I was thinking, I mean, one, Asian solidarity is dead. It's not going to happen like again in cricket. Two, even if that remained as it was in the current climate, if they are exchanging fires in the border, they're not going to be friendship on the field. Of all people, Sachin is not going to be the one taking the risk of going and embracing Wasim. I mean, we would rather tweet saying, oh my God, this is unacceptable. We shouldn't be playing cricket at this time. That's how much things have changed. And the other part of the Asian solidarity is the reversal of what's happened, right? One, India is not going to take along Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Yeah. But more importantly, Australia and England have joined with India and become this new solidarity gang of their own. Like if Australia had to refuse to play in Sri Lanka, India is the country which they'll please, and they'll sort of harbor some favors and get India on their side.
No, you know what you're saying, Mahesh, about friendship on the field. I have another very interesting, sort of aside to offer on this is that there was a point in which Indians and Pakistanis were genuinely very they were friendly. It was all very relaxed between each other, which it still is. It's not reached the level of open animosity kind of a thing. They behave much better on the field than their TV anchors do on both sides. But what has happened is that India's growing affluence, money, all that, has almost given them a sense of that, these are our poor cousins. What do we have to share with them? What can we possibly say? There is this thing. I was having a conversation with people about this during the last World Cup, and I got a feeling that this is how they look at it now, which is very sad in a way, because eventually, it's a loss if you kind of lose that almost the camaraderie that you had, But anyway, we've reached a position where things are just too grim and terrible, and our cricketers have surrendered their sense of independence anyway. So.
No, but Shraddha, isn't it so ironic that India, Pakistan is still the match of any multinational tournament, whether it's a World Cup or Champions Trophy or whatever, and the ICC goes to great extents to ensure that India and Pakistan will meet.
Yes.
Because they will never play in the same, they will usually not be in the same group. Oh, sorry, they will be in the same group because then they have to play. If they're not in the same group, then they may not even play each other. So they will be like that. So the extent to which people are going to make an India-Pakistan match happen, and then the extent to which people are going to make India-Pakistan not happen. So it's so polar opposite.
I mean, it's ludicrous in the sense, in a way. I mean, it's not even a match anymore. It's a currency. India versus Pakistan is a currency in cricket and in politics between the the two countries. That's what the thing is. You know.
Yeah, but there will not even be like, I mean, the fact is, it's really bizarre to me because the economics and the politics are now in opposition, and usually they're together, but now they're totally in opposition.
Yeah, but the politics, when it requires that to happen, then politics and what's the other thing, the real politics that will kick into play when it's required at some level to be of the same side, because it will. I mean, these people can move on both sides. They can just turn on a dime almost, you know.
And use it for their convenience. Yeah.
Yes. So there'll be friendship, not a friendship cup, friendship series. Do you remember the India-Pakistan friendship? They had one long sort of passage where they played each other all the time. Every few months, they were playing each other.
Between 2004 to nearly for 4-5 years, yeah.
No, the big three axis has changed completely, right? Earlier, like when India were playing Pakistan frequently at the time, it made commercial sense. But now, for instance, India is touring England every 3 years. England is touring India every 3 years. Like the 4-year cycle is somehow compressed into 3 years these days. And you don't have to play Pakistan. The other thing is, even if you play Pakistan, while it's commercially beneficial for both, it's commercially much more beneficial for Pakistan. And given the current state of politics in the cricket at the moment, they don't want it, right? I mean, you can always argue that all cricket boards have always been influenced by political sort of powers of that time. But I don't think it's been as sort of partisan along the party lines as it is right now. I mean, think of it this way, right? Can you imagine Jay Shah going and having a conversation with whoever is in Pakistan cricket board right now to think of a series? No way. It is absolutely against their vote banks. I mean, they're not going to do it. I mean, just the thought of it is so funny, so amusing that we know it's not going to happen. Sorry, just, on a related point, the other thing that really amused me on going back to this is, again, on the chapter of Bombay versus Mumbai and Shiv Sena. Shiv Sena at that time was floating an idea of Bangladeshi migrants coming to Bombay and taking away local jobs. And they had a plan to implement a system of figuring out who's the real citizen and who's an infiltrator. That sounds so scarily similar to something that was occupying quite a lot of media space last year, isn't it?
Yeah, and also the crucial point about how Bal Thackeray wanted Indian Muslims to have tears in their eyes when India lost, and how Mike basically clearly points out how this is a negative test. And he says how you're not talking about how you want them to rejoice when India win, but you want them to cry when India loses. This is like some inverse of patriotism.
And he was just so good at spotting bullshittery. You know, he was just so good at spotting it at a political level, at a level of race. It's like he sensed it and he knew it. He could instantly recognize it. I just found something that I must tell you, that his first protest actually was at the age of 14 when he organized a walkout of his school against the Vietnam War.
He wrote about it, right? Yeah, correct.
Yeah, he made his school walkout to protest the war. He was 14 years old. What a guy.
No wonder he understood crowds so well.
Yeah. He knew how to lead them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we've talked for quite a while. Any final thoughts on this, on the book? I mean, of course, my final thought is anyone who can pick up the book, who can find it, please read it. It's one of the most refreshing books you will read on cricket. It's a very original book. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing much more that I can say. But yeah, I mean, guys, go ahead with your parting thoughts. Fidel?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've raved about it already enough. I think it's a book that I think anyone who's kind of thinking about writing about cricket would massively benefit from picking up. Just because it would expand your idea of, I mean, I was talking to Ahmed Naqvi on a WhatsApp group, and he made the point, you know, he read it early on and it expanded, it showed him what cricket writing could be. And I think that is, that would be, you know, one of the things that I loved about the book. I think it shows you that, you know, you don't have to follow a formula. You can do your own thing. you can write about all this other stuff that's like essential to the way that cricket cricket is played, and yet still have a love of the game, have a love for, you know, the way someone times a shot, the way someone changes up the ball in their wrists. All of that stuff doesn't take away from seeing cricket in its like full social and political context. I think it's very quickly leapt into my top 5 cricket books ever, and very high up on that list. So I'm kind of kicking myself for not having read it earlier.
Yeah, Sharda?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I remember the first question you asked me about, sort of the Mike impact on my work and my life and so on. And I was just thinking that in a way he was a friend, and he was also like a guru in a sense of how he went about looking at sport and at cricket, and the way he showed what could be done and what really mattered at many ways. And I agree with what Fidel says about being able to love the sport despite all its warts and everything. And one of his last pieces of writing, I've just found it, so I must read it. I know it's not about the book technically, but Mike, so you'll allow me. He wrote for the Wisden India Almanac. So in which he tried to explain why we love cricket despite its sheer pointlessness. So he said, and he wrote a website post talking about some Mankading story or whatever, and between England and Sri Lanka. And Mike asked if England would look, open quotes, look any less miserable than they did through the long winter months. Maybe Cook thinks the spice of ill feeling will do the trick, in which case he has an even duller imagination than I suspected. So this is just, him taking pot shots at everybody. And the last mail that he wrote to a lot of people, he used to have a distribution list. He said he'd been through a lot of chemotherapy and treatment and everything. He said one of the reasons I'm glad to be alive is that I can have a go at these bastards. That was his last line. So in a way, this book is very much of him and like him, and he was just an extraordinary writer and an extraordinary thinker and a terrific person to know and to see and to sort of open up a whole world of, that particular event that he covered and the cricket that was around at the cricket at the time it belonged to as well.
Yeah, so before I get to, Mahesh, I just want to make one point about what Fidel and Sharda are saying. Basically, there's been a lot of talk, especially these days, about how, there's politics and sports and whether they should mix and whether they should not mix and all. And Mike had absolutely no illusions about that. He always knew that one makes up the other and that you cannot have sport without politics. You cannot have, sport doesn't exist just as sport. And in fact, he wrote a, lovely review of a book on football, and he had put it just, this was in his final days. And in that, I quote a line in which he says, people claim that once the competition is underway and the ball is rolling, all the discontents will vanish. We are cast as consumers and nothing but consumers, expected to imbibe the corporate branded spectacle without qualms or conscience. In that context, engaging critically with sports, seeing them as part of the broader human current, becomes a necessary subversive act. FIFA and its corporate partners have a vested interest in promoting tunnel vision, but the rest of us do not. Enjoyment of the football and critique of its context can and should go hand in hand. The idea that one excludes the other is a myth we need to shed. Close quotes. So yeah, that pretty much, it tells you so much about Mike and about, how sport is so much more than just sport. And yeah, I would encourage many of you to, read in that context and view the sport in that context.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are similar to what all of you have said. It basically takes the what do they know of cricket quote and makes it much more accessible in a way that all of us can relate to. And as sport doesn't exist in a vacuum, cricket doesn't exist in a vacuum is something that a lot of people say. But he's basically saying it's not just cricket, right? Everything in the society, if you take it standalone, it doesn't reflect the larger prism, and everything is influenced by the larger economics, larger politics around it. And his writing, one like Fidel mentioned, out even with all these sort of frameworks added, he can still see the beauty of sport for what it is without necessarily ignoring the allied components. And so his cricket writing is itself quite beautiful. His writing about the politics and the economics of cricket is razor sharp. But above all this, his observations are also fairly timeless, in the sense he's not bound by the politics of its time. He's not bound by whatever was the let's say topical political sort of choice of its time. So I kind of want to highlight this by reading one passage that he wrote about Imran Khan, which I don't think anybody would have seen through Imran Khan's political career at such an early stage as he's done here. So he starts by saying, the real contradiction in his soul is not between East and West, but between populism and elitism. He's pro-poor but not anti-capitalist, tolerant but not secular, Islamic but not fundamentalist. He wants an end to arbitrary rule by law-breaking governments, but is hazy about the details of democracy.
Oh, amazing.
That could be said of Imran Khan today as much as in 96.
Exactly. Amazing. That's like a prescient observation. I don't think he would have I don't think he would have met him out. I don't know.
That comes from seeing Imran's political career for what it is, not being influenced by Imran as this amazing out-of-the-world cricketer and stuff like that. So he's able to kind of see the pieces for what they are, even when he's seeing them, all of them together.
Yeah, it's almost like, reading this book, you wish, this book makes you wish that you could come to cricket afresh as an adult. Because none of us had that option. I mean, we all grew up with cricket, and we have so much baggage with what we know of cricket. But then this is the kind of book that actually makes you unlearn so many things that you know, and to look at it, like to look at each small thing, and then to say that, okay, this is like, there is a larger picture here. And so, yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from listeners about what they think of the book. And also, if you pick it up and read it, please write in. Please tell us what you thought of, different passages, etc. And write your own reviews. And if you want to discuss it on your own podcast, yeah, please. That would be wonderful. And so this was great. Thank you guys, Sharda, Fidel, Mahesh. Thanks for talking about this book.
Thanks, Sidvi. It is a pleasure. Sorry, Fidel, I had to ask you one question before we close off. I know you mentioned this a couple of times, saying, I wish I had read this earlier. But I've read this a couple of times, and on both occasions, I felt like, as a person, I have not evolved enough to fully grasp it. I feel like I should keep reading it in like my later stages, and I'll appreciate this book even more. And in a way, I feel like the fact that I didn't read it when I was younger is a blessing in disguise. Did you get any similar thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the book that rewards rereading at different points in life. I mean, I've just literally read it in the last couple of months, so I don't have that great of a kind of a timeline in which I've like been able to appreciate it. The reason why it's just from a writing perspective, I think the kinds of things that he puts together here, the kinds of scathing comments that he makes, the kind of fearlessness with which he writes is something that I kind of wish I had embraced when I was like earlier on in my writing career. I think that's probably what I meant more. But I think you're absolutely right. The more later on in life when you read it, I could probably read it, in a year from now and get completely different things out of it. Because while his style is so light and so accessible, he's breaking down so many complex things, and it's probably impossible that someone can read this book first time and get and mine it for all its value. I think it is subsequent rereadings would probably be really rewarding.
All right. So I think on that note, it's a good note to end. And again, thank you again, guys, for joining. And we hope to talk about more books. And, we will definitely bring you back on to have more thoughts from you. We can't let you go so easily. That brings us to the end of another episode of the 81 All Out podcast. If you enjoy the work we do, please support us via ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/81allout. You can find the link in the show notes, and it will allow you to either set up a recurring monthly payment or throw in a one-time contribution. Also, please subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you prefer. It would be great if you could leave a rating and a review so that more people can find us. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts on the work we do, so please send us your feedback.
For two, India